Who are you? What are you doing here?
Put your gun down. Who are you, and what's going on here?
Leave the loner alone. He killed the beast that drove my brothers insane.
Shut up!
Stalker 2 is one of those games that I genuinely never thought I'd actually be playing. And yet, here we are with the long-awaited and much-anticipated sequel to one of gaming's all-time most niche series. A game that survived through both a pandemic and a literal war to be here, letting you play as everyone's favourite treasure hunters and venture back out into the infamous zone. And I'd say that GSC Game World have succeeded in one very important way, in the way that this is definitely a Stalker game. That being in the sense that it's challenging, depressing, and an often gorgeous journey through what's more or less a post-apocalyptic hellhole.
That's good.
But then also much like a Stalker game, it's often buggy, glitchy, unenjoyable, tedious, and then just outright broken at times.
Remember how we ventured?
You shouldn't have wandered over here, man.
What? What the fuck?
That's bad.
I mean, let's get one thing very clear right off the bat, okay? This is not a game that's likely to win over any new fans. That is to say, if you didn't like the old ones, well, then this probably ain't gonna change that. In fact, it's unabashedly old school in that regard, using a very similar inventory system, with a lot of gear also being identical in regards to your healing items, the drinks, and food. You'll still swill down vodka to remove radiation, you'll scull an energy drink to get your stamina back up, and eat so much processed meat that it's kind of a wonder you haven't had a stroke. Even the sound effects are the exact same ones from the old games.
Ми не домовлялися щодо оплати.
So, people who love this series and appreciate what they do so well are going to find a lot to love here in Stalker 2. Everyone else though, well, I'm not entirely sure.
I don't want to get it dirty anyways.
Can I go now?
And I just kind of feel like unless you got a basic understanding of exactly what GSC are going for with this series, well, Stalker 2 is going to be a pretty damn miserable experience. But then again, like, even if you are, that still might be the case.
I'm watching you, chump.
Right, so before I get too far into things, I do have to thank LG for sponsoring this video. Now, one of their latest ultra-wide gaming monitors is the Ultra Gear 45-inch 800R OLED, which comes with a curved surface along with a 240Hz refresh rate and a 0.03 ms response time, offering up really one of the most immersive ways to play video games, with a 29 aspect ratio that allows for some incredible visuals, with that ratio also offering up the best possible vertical visibility. As well as that, it's got VESA Display HDR, which is great for gaming and streaming, offering up impeccable image detail during those darker scenes, along with an adopted micro lens array, which allows for far more brighter and vivid picture quality. And just for me as well personally, like, one of the best things about the ultra wides is when I'm editing, allowing me to have a much bigger workspace and also have multiple bins open inside my editing software, making the whole process a lot quicker. And yeah, like, since I spend a fair bit of my time editing, this sort of thing really is a godsend. It's a whole lot better on my neck than having to look back and forth between multiple monitors. But then even just going back and playing through older games, a lot of which have ultra-wide support these days. Now, it just kind of offers up an entirely unique and awesome way to re-experience some of my favourite titles. So yeah, dog, check out that link in the description to find out how you can get in on the ground level for this truly awesome monitor. And yeah, once again, thanks to LG for sponsoring this video. Right, so let's talk about the story first. The gist is that you're playing as a dude named Skiff, heading into the outskirts of the zone with some kind of a scanner to perform a bunch of tests. However, before he's able to finish, he's soon detected by the Ward, who are sort of like a new authority force that reside in the area, who are then also attacked by an unseen culprit, ending in Skiff almost being captured and left out there in the wilderness. When he wakes up, he strolls into the nearest town and then starts trying to find the whereabouts of his scanner, along with still having to deal with the Ward, who are very pissed off, because a bunch of their men were killed during that attack. This instantly sets up this whole faction dynamic between them and the other stalkers, forcing Skiff to decide pretty early on which group he's going to side with. And throughout the course of the game, you get to make some pretty big decisions when it comes to who you're going to work with.
Nope, nothing so far.
All of which no doubt affect the ending, but also how ensuing missions are going to play out. Even outside of the story though, it seems almost every single encounter or side mission gives you the option to either end things diplomatically or just kill everyone instead.
Tell me more about this Shach guy.
Now, Stalker 2's got English dialogue turned on by default, which I find to be incredibly odd, considering where the game's set. And hearing people talk with what sounds like British accents in the middle of Ukraine is just kinda bizarre.
The ward asks the questions around here. The rest of you just smile and nod, or keep your mouths shut. About face, Stalker.
I mean, I get that a lot of time's passed since that original incident, so it would make sense that people from a bunch of different countries have all traveled to the zone for their own different reasons.
I'm watching you, chump.
But it still does sound kind of weird hearing everyone speaking in English, as well as the fact that the voice acting is often just flat out terrible. I mean, goddamn son, this stuff is really not good.
But you are a stalker, right? You wander into that crap every day, detector in hand, trading artifacts for hooch.
We're talking Elder Scrolls Oblivion tier, and it is kind of funny to a point, but then it just starts to become immersion breaking.
Now, this is getting interesting.
The only real advantage you get from English dialogue is that you can hear the enemies shouting out their strategies during combat, which gives you a bit of a hint as to what they're planning. But still, my advice, first and foremost, is to turn that shit off and change it to Ukrainian. I mean, it might still be bad, but at least I can't understand what they're saying, so they get the benefit of the doubt.
Do you have to be so stubborn?
Oh yeah, and while you're there in the options menu, turn off that crosshair as well. Either way though, the story here quickly starts to become scrambled and a bit incoherent, with Skiff just being sent here, there, and everywhere. Having to kill someone, or find a document, or activate some kind of machinery in this never-ending quest that just seems to go on and on. And then there's all these moments when you think that things are about to come to an end, like during some kind of ultimate battle or sequence, only for it to then slow back down again and give you another dozen missions to complete. GSC have said that a first time playthrough is going to take anywhere from 35 to 40 hours to complete. And if you want to try and do every little side task and mission on the map as well, then it's going to be upwards of 100. And the side missions do help at least in terms of the world building, with you getting to meet some really interesting characters and all that kind of stuff.
It's not exactly hot shit, but it's all I've got.
Like some poor asshole whose brother's been killed in an anomaly field. So he wants you to go out there and rescue the dude's corpse, getting in his good books even further if you agree not to loot the corpse. And yeah, these kind of missions are interesting and give you a bit of a reason to linger around these smaller sections just that little bit longer. But the payoff for most of these just ain't all that great in my experience. And all the gear and the cash that you get from the story missions is far superior.
If you ever swing by the flea market, give me a holler.
Oh yeah, considering that the story alone is supposed to take upwards of 30 hours, I don't know, it just kind of made me want to engage in all this science stuff even less.
Good. Okay. Maybe you know something I don't.
I think that the OG Stalker fans are going to ultimately appreciate what's going on here though, and there is some cool little throwbacks here and there to the old games as well. Like getting to revisit Garbage and see how the whole thing looks nowadays, as well as seeing the remnants of the Monolith faction and how these guys are all coping. There's references to Clear Sky, and at a few points you even get to hear Strelok's name mentioned too, which never failed to give me goosebumps on my arms and balls.
Shut up!
But this is a story that takes a whole lot of time to get going, man, and even when it's going, that pace is kinda glacial. How about the fact, for instance, they thought it was a good idea to have the prologue set at nighttime, where all you're doing is running around and popping down that scanning device for half an hour. These earlier parts do kind of serve as a basic tutorial, I get it, but other than that, it's just pretty uneventful and unexciting. And the most interesting part in this whole sequence you have no control over. Which, not only doesn't really communicate what kind of game this is going to be, but also completely undersells the visuals and the presentation right off the bat. Remembering Crysis 3, how the game opened up with this great looking thunderstorm, before then showing you that gorgeous sunrise, really emphasizing how the graphics were going to play a key part in the overall experience. Yeah, well, in Stalker 2 you're just running around a pitch black forest at night time. Oh yeah, and keep that word in the back of your mind too, running, because that's going to come up a whole lot here.
From that day on, if I was going somewhere, I was running.
Now, outside of the story and the dialogue stuff, the core aspects in Stalker 2 is broken down into either combat or then exploration and artifact hunting. There's a lot of familiar looking weapons returning here, from all the various AKs through to sawn-off shotguns and rifles, with the player really only ever being able to carry around like a couple at a time, mostly due to the incredibly limited backpack capacity. And every little thing you pick up in this game has a bit of weight to it, even individual stacks of ammo. So you really need to think about what you're actually taking with you before venturing out. Artifact hunting, which has always played a crucial role in the entire series, returns here as well. However, it feels this time like it's been totally fucked over, using a similar system to the one in Clear Sky and Call of Pripyat. Now, most of these are going to be found inside the larger anomalies, however, they're invisible until you're basically standing on top of them. So what you end up doing is throwing out this infinite supply of metal bolts to cause the nearby anomalies to activate, giving you a few precious seconds to run past them and then try to find that specific spot that the artifact's hiding. And yeah, like, it's a solid concept in principle, forcing you to go into the belly of the beast, quite literally, navigating past certain death to find the sweet spot where these things are hidden, only for them to then have the most useless and inconsequential benefits, really making you wonder why you even bothered. The one consistent effect that all of these things have is that they cause your radiation levels to rise. And if you've even got like a slither of rad poisoning, it puts this annoying visual effect around the edge of the screen. Which means that all these artifacts are really going to do is chew through your anti-rad gear whilst offering up benefits smaller than a bee's dick. I mean, look, I'm sure there's some genuinely useful artifacts hidden out there. Lord knows I tried to find them. But most of the ones I came across were just kinda useless. And even the good ones from the prior games that have returned seem to have been severely nerfed. Like Moonlight, for instance, which was an outright broken artifact in Shadow of Chernobyl. Now, this one more or less gave you infinite stamina, so you could sprint around indefinitely without ever having to stop to catch your breath. In Stalker 2, like, this thing does exist, but it has an entirely different property. What this all results in is that one of the core mechanics of not only Stalker 2 but the entire series really just feels kind of unfun and unrewarding. This brings me on to the other main aspect of the game, which is all the shooting and combat, with Stalker 2 at the very least bringing back that kind of hardcore gun porn the series has always been known for. This means you've got a whole bunch of different weapons, all with their various calibers of bullet, along with different upgrade trees for every single one of them. Much like the other games, this isn't a run and gun shooter, and you end up really playing the whole thing tactically most of the time, leaning around corners and taking pot shots at enemies with your limited supply of ammunition. With that realism aspect then completely juxtaposed with the unrealistic mechanic of being able to pop a medkit or bandage up your wounds in seconds. And even on the so-called normal difficulty mode, I'd find myself having to spare medkits and bandages constantly during combat just to stay on my feet. As far as the AI goes in Stalker 2, like, I wouldn't say it's worse than the previous games, but I'd just kind of say that it's different. Now, in the original games, the enemies would be really clever in the way that they approached any given situation. They'd slowly push on your position if they had the numbers, but it was also common for them to just hang back and hide in a corner somewhere, trying to ambush you. I mean, yeah, like, that kind of stuff could be annoying when it happened, but you can't deny that it was impressive in the way they acted. The inaccuracy and unreliability with a lot of the weapons ended up in these really intense shootouts, where you traded gunfire back and forth, with that final lucky bullet ending up in a crucial headshot that finished someone off. Combat in Stalker 2 though, like, it seems a lot more basic, in the sense that most of your bullets go where you want them to all of the time. And I mean, that's fine, but it also means that you're getting pelted by the enemies a hell of a lot as well. And if you so much stick a pinky toe out of cover, then it's gonna be shot to shit. Just kind of like the whole thing's been reduced to a generic hit scanning shooter. And combat isn't challenging because your enemies are outsmarting you or using clever tactics. It's challenging because a couple of bullets is gonna knock off your entire health bar, forcing you to use bandages every 2 seconds to stop from bleeding to death. Just kind of seems like every single little bit of damage you take in this game, like, hits your carotid artery or something, because you start bleeding so often here. The weapon and gear degradation here is also just insane. And I know that the whole series has always been about carrying around hand-me-down weapons that felt like they were held together by duct tape, but here in Stalker 2, it feels like it's on a whole different level. Every single weapon you find on an NPC is completely busted, or at the very least, almost broken, which is going to make them prone to jamming. And I've got no problem with this whole jamming mechanic. In fact, I think it actually adds a really fun element to the combat. It'd just be nice if this at least affected the AI, who can shoot at you for these 10-minute long gunfights without any issue. But even then, like, the stuff you do find in working condition falls apart so quickly, it's like it's made out of bog roll. There's only a handful of NPCs in the game who can even repair your gear, and even then, repairing stuff becomes so expensive that you're usually better off just not bothering. And speaking of that too, there's not even that many people who you can actually offload all your gear to either, making for long periods of time where you're hauling around all of this stuff that you want to sell but simply can't. I mean, this game right here is going to make you loathe the concept of having a weight limit. And I just kind of think there's a difference between vendors being sparse by design, but then it just kind of seeming like they forgot to add in these very important NPCs into an area.
Good. Now run along.
Seems like all the best guns and gear you come across is found during those main missions, but also in a more scummy move, hidden away in the stashes you get from the deluxe and the premium editions of the game. And I don't know if this was supposed to be an ironic joke, but there's a bunch of stashes in particular called journalist stashes that seem to have the best weapons. I don't know if this is supposed to be some kind of a jab at the perceived lack of skill in gaming journalists, but either way, the stuff I found in some of these stashes was far superior to whatever else I came across in the base game. Still though, as far as the shooting is concerned against the other humans, this stuff is fun enough. It's loud, impactful, and it's violent. And I also like too how every NPC in the game has their own unique name, in a very clear attempt to make me feel like a piece of shit for killing them. It's the combat against the various mutants though where it all starts to go to hell.
Good Lord, what is happening in there?
Like with all the dogs for instance, which seem way more dumbed down this time. Now in the old games when you came up against these things, they really did behave like a pack of wild animals. If they were in a big enough group, they'd make a push on the player, but then they'd quickly scatter like cowards if one of them got killed, breaking formation and running off like a bunch of little bitches. Not only did it make them seem realistic, but it also helped from a gameplay perspective, simply because getting bum rushed by like half a dozen mutant dogs doesn't really make for balanced combat. How does it work in Stalker 2? Well, you just get bum rushed by half a dozen mutant dogs. And there's no real sense of self-preservation to these things at all, as they all just come running at you at once in a completely nonsensical way. Nor do they even really seem to be fazed by gunfire. I mean, yeah, like they may be more dangerous, but they don't seem half as intelligent. Fighting the Buras is, again, also pretty damn dreadful.
We can consider this task a success. I believe we can proceed to the next stage.
Now, the first fight against one of these things is inside a pitch black cave, where it telepathically controls some nearby rifles to fire on you. And for the first couple of times I died, I couldn't even figure out what was happening. Like, I thought the game had just glitched out or something. How about the part where you're getting attacked by a controller while you're stuck out in the middle of an open swamp with nowhere to take cover? But by far the worst update here is with the bloodsuckers.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Because someone thought it would be a good idea to give these things way more health points, and also have them doing this really annoying attack where they lunge at you, knock you on your ass, go invisible, run away, and then just repeat. And because you don't really have any means of effectively dodging these melee attacks, you've really just got to tank all these hits, and shoot back as much as you can until they go down. There's a sequence where you got to fight 3 at once in a dark basement, and I think this might be one of the worst fucking things in the entire Stalker franchise. And I would be genuinely surprised if this even got play tested. They just seem to rely on these things way too much, and it just seems 9 times out of 10, if you come across a mutant out there in the zone, it's gonna be one of these assholes.
A few moments later.
Got to the point where I would audibly groan when I realised I had to take on yet another one, because I knew I was about to burn through another half dozen medkits and lose a bunch of my shotgun shells. And yes, I know that's how they behaved in the original games, but I don't know, like you'd kinda hope the passage of time and technology would have allowed them to make these things somewhat more fun to fight. I mean, at least they still look scary, I guess, and they still serve the purpose of making me jump out of my chair every time they appear out of nowhere to give me a colonoscopy. But I think what's most disappointing about all of this is that there's really not that much combat when you break the whole thing down. In fact, I'd say it probably makes up maybe 30% of the entire experience, whereas in the old games it seems like you were getting into gunfights every few minutes. Most of your time here is just spent running back and forth for a mission. Running 5 to 10 minutes across the map to either have a conversation with someone or instead kill them, before then running 5 to 10 minutes back to turn the mission in. Stalker 2 runs on the Unreal Engine 5, and on a positive side, it does have some genuinely great looking moments there, especially with the whole night and day cycle thing they've got going on. There's a lot of great effects here with the way that water looks, the changes in the weather, plus the ways all the various anomalies behave and react when you get near them. The music is subtle and not overbearing, just heightening those moments when something occurs, more or less serving as another layer of ambience. And when the whole thing comes together, it's a really appealing and immersive game. I still really love those moments during the heavy thunderstorms where the wind's howling and lightning's cracking down constantly, even hitting objects near the player. Plus, I really like how all these various little actions now have their own unique animations too, when it comes to drinking, eating or healing. Plus, I appreciate how you can still just shoot the shit at a campfire with a bunch of other stalkers. It also brings back the emission mechanic from Call of Pripyat.
Listen up, diggers! We got reports of an emission coming, so get to cover.
Where every now and then there'll be some kind of super nasty energy storm, and you've got to find cover in a nearby building until the whole thing blows over. And these seem even more dangerous than before, with the sky turning dark red as if it's like the end of the world or something. So yeah, whether you're running around in the early morning with the sun shining brightly, or skulking around in the evening when it's raining and you can barely see where you're walking, you can't really deny that the game once again excels with its atmosphere and vibe. Though I'd kind of appreciate if someone could tell me if the yellow paint on these ladders is supposed to be a self-aware joke, or if it's just supposed to be rust. But then on the flip side, for a lot of the time, it also just kind of looks like every other game you've seen in Unreal Engine 5. Especially when it comes to all these tall trees and grass. I mean, once you've seen one Forrest in an Unreal Engine game, you've pretty much seen them all. Not sure if too many people remember or even know to begin with, but the X-ray engine that the original games ran on was pretty groundbreaking for its time, doing a lot of interesting things when it came to the way it all worked. But more than that though, they were unique to the series, with no other games using that engine, giving that original trilogy its own unique look and feel. Those underground areas, particularly when you went through all those abandoned labs, is the stuff that nightmares are made of, and easily the most memorable sections in some of those original games. Stalker 2, but just don't seem to quite hit the same anymore. It's just like having this thing running on the same engine that's been used by a bazillion other games makes the whole thing feel so homogenized, and it's definitely lost a little bit of its spark. I mean, just compare the main menu in Shadow of Chernobyl, for instance, to the drab and uninteresting one in Stalker 2. Kind of thing that makes you realize how we truly took it for granted how effortlessly soulful a lot of the games from back in the mid-2000s were.
I said come in, don't stand there.
And it sure ain't helping either that 90% of the map here is just made up of the same looking forests, which results in running past the same looking bushes and trees for 10-minute stints as you hoof down those energy drinks to keep your stamina up. sometimes even longer than that, where you'll be sent out to the arse-crack edge of the map for a mission, only to then have to run all the way back. Very rarely can you even run in a straight line either, because of all those random anomalies that are blocking your path. Oh yeah, and by far, the absolute worst area in that regard is the swamps. And honestly, like, this stuff was so soul-sucking. It makes the scene in Neverending Story when Atreyu's horse dies seem like a comedy movie in comparison. And yes, again, I get that the old games did the same thing, but they weren't even half as big as Stalker 2 is, with this one apparently being around 64 square kilometers in size. And for a game where there's no vehicles and very limited fast travel options, that is a whole lot of running around. People often make fun of Bethesda or other modern games for being loading screen simulators, but goddamn son, at least they give you the option to skip over all that traversal and get back to the actual good stuff. There's going to be people who'll tell you that holding down the run button for 10 minutes, along with popping an energy drink every few seconds, is somehow better than just opening up the map screen, clicking where you want to go, and being there in like 4 seconds.
Bring back some loot next time.
And I do think that it's impressive that the map is so big and packed with all this detail, but if the vast majority of this space is just bush and trees, along with the occasional, arguably useless artifact to find, it really begs the question of like, is this what we needed? You've got to remember that the open world genre really has evolved quite a bit since the Stalker series first came out almost 2 decades ago. And it all just seems kinda weird to me how Stalker 2's clearly made some updates to the formula, but then it also seems weirdly stringent in regards to some of the others. For instance, just like in Call of Pripyat, you can sleep in beds to advance the clock, which is a really handy feature if you don't want to be wandering about in the dark. But then, despite bringing back this mechanic, you can still only sleep at specific beds, instead of, you know, any bed, because, I don't know, I guess that would have been a good idea.
Let me sleep for the love of God!
Or how about adding in like a portable camp or a sleeping bag so you can stay out in the wild? I mean, it's not like the sleeping bag hasn't been a mod for the past 17 years, is it? We're also exploring the zone now, years after the events in the old games, and if the various accents with all the NPCs is any indicator, then a lot of these people from different walks of life have now come into the area.
I'm watching you, chump.
So is it really outside the realm of possibility that some of them would have brought in things like vehicles for faster land travel? How about the fact that this is a 2024 game and I can't climb up ledges? I mean, I'm not asking to be Faith Connors and run around in parkour mode or anything, but surely now I could clamber up something that's chest high, right? It just kind of harks back to what I said earlier, how this really is a Stalker game through and through.
Cover me! I'll hide!
It's a 2007 game in a 2024 shell. And these kind of things that are going to irk and confuse newer players are no doubt the same kind of things that returning fans are going to love seeing the most. The one thing though that I don't think anyone's going to appreciate is all the weird bugs and glitches, the anomalies that aren't meant to be in the game. With the most common thing I had happening being NPCs or items that would be floating off the ground. Problems with the sound was an irritating and frequent issue as well, where it's like half of the sound effects just stopped working, and I'd either have to load my last save to fix it or restart the entire game. There was even one point where Skiff's voice sounded like it was coming through a radio when I was talking to someone directly.
I'll go get the inductor you mentioned.
Plus, I've had a few times where I'd be killed and then reload a save file which would then reset the enemy AI, making them forget that I was even there anymore.
What was that noise?
It also comes with all the accoutrements of the Unreal Engine 5, that being constant stuttering when moving across the map. And because they're loading the whole thing at once now, this is a common and immersion breaking issue. Thankfully though, I haven't had like any mission breaking bugs that prevented me from progressing or anything like that, so that's a positive. and GSC have already dropped a 30 or so gigabyte patch even before the game's launched, with another day one patch on the way as well. So hopefully people don't experience the same kind of stuff I did.
About the job you asked me to do.
But still, like I'd imagine it's going to be a bit of a buggy experience for a lot of people. And again, like I get that this is the whole modus operandi of the series, I get it. I bought Shadow of Chernobyl when it first launched. I even got that special edition that came in a metal tin, and that thing was broken to shit when it came out. It's just I don't think that excuse of, oh, these games have always been broken or buggy is really valid anymore, considering we're in 2024.
What?
I mean, the same kind of people who defend stuff like this would also be the first in line to criticize the shit out of any other game that did anything similar. And I just kind of feel like if you're going to do that, then you need to apply that same logic to every title. The other argument people are probably going to come back with is that mods are going to save this thing, and yes, that may be the case. And as far as I know, they're going to be prioritizing mod support moving ahead. So at the end of the day, like, there is a whole lot of factors to consider here, and I don't think it's a simple matter of this being either good or bad. And again, like, keep in mind that throughout this game's development cycle, we've had a global pandemic, not to mention the country the game's made in literally going to war. And either one of those things alone could have been the death penalty for this whole studio, and yet somehow they've still managed to pull this thing off. At the end of the day, I don't really see this thing getting rave reviews, nor are people going to really be holding hands and singing Kumbaya over how much they all love it. But for those few people who don't mind trudging through a swamp at a snail's pace to sell off stacks of AKs and radioactive artifacts before heading off and doing the whole thing all over again, well, those people are really going to find the game they're looking for here. I just kind of wish that overall there was more of a sense that they'd had time to properly dot the I's and cross the T's. Yeah, motherfucker.
Get out of here, Stalker.